This is our study of the Introduction to the Bible. This is Marion Fox speaking. We are in our second lesson. We'll be recording 2 lessons each Thursday night. The divisions of the Bible is in part 2. Now we've taken the pre-captivity prophets up to the pre-captivity prophets. But now we're going to look at captivity prophets. The captivity in Babylonia, Babylonian captivity, began in 596 and ended in 536. The remnant then returned under Medo-Persian rule and returned to what we would call the land of Canaan. In modern times, it's called Palestine, but it wasn't called that in the Bible times. The walls of Jerusalem and the temple were rebuilt after the remnant returned. So after they returned, the walls of the temple of Jerusalem and the temple were rebuilt. Now, the captivity prophets, there were 2 of them, 2 captivity prophets, Ezekiel and Daniel. Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah prophesied at the time of the captivity. It's possible that Habakkuk and Zephaniah went into captivity, Habakkuk and Zephaniah. Jeremiah was still prophesying in 560 BC. And he stayed in Jerusalem and then was forcibly carried down to Egypt. And there's where he died. Probably was murdered by the children of Israel, by these people who were unfaithful, unbelievers. They were not believers in the prophecies and the word of God that is spoken through Jeremiah, for them to trust Jeremiah's word and stay in the land. They could have had the land for 70 years and prospered, but they chose not to believe. So they lost that blessing that they had, and they forfeited because of their unbelief. And the history of this captivity is found in these books, the books of Jeremiah, Habakkuk, and Zephaniah, but it's also found in 2 Kings 25, verses 18 through 30 of short history, and in 2 Chronicles 36, verses 17 through 23. So we have a very brief listing of this. And so Zephaniah, Habakkuk may have gone into captivity. And we can't say for sure, but Ezekiel and Daniel were definitely captivity prophets. Ezekiel 1:1 through 3 tells us, "Now it came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, in the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives by the river Chebar." Now, the river Chebar was not really a river. It was a canal that had turned into a river. Water flowed through it, but it was actually a canal, and the water would flow through that canal, coming from a river, so it was like a river. So it was called a river. That the heavens were opened, and I saw visions of God in the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiachin's captivity. The word of Jehovah came expressly into Ezekiel the priest. So now we know that Ezekiel is a priest just like Jeremiah, the son of Buzi in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Chebar, and the hand of Jehovah was there upon him. So right here now, this river, or it's really just a canal, but it turned into a river because water flowed through it just like it would through any other stream. Because they had cut through the land, and so the river, it became a tributary or a section of the river. And the Lord was upon him. Jehoiachin went into captivity in 596 BC. This would make this. The date of it would be 592 BC. So we have the exact date of his prophesying here at this time. We know it's 597, when Jehoiachin went into captivity. Now we go to the book of Daniel, and Daniel 1:1 through 2, in the 3rd year of the reign of Jehoiakim. Now, I want to back up a bit. a king called Jehoiachin, and this is mentioned here, and my mouse is running over it. Jehoiachin is not the same as Joachim. So keep that in mind. They're two different kings. The third year of the reign of Joachim, king of Judah, came Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, unto Jerusalem and besieged it. And the Lord gave Joachim, king of Judah, into his hand with part of the vessels of the house of God, and he carried them to the land of Shinar. Now, Shinar is the old name for what we know as probably Iraq, a good portion of Iraq, maybe Kuwait, and portions of what is now Iran. That would be that region. Shinar was an old name way back in the book of Genesis, to the house of his God, and he brought the vessel into the treasure house of his God. They had this foolish idea that one God was stronger than another, and if the nation won, and yet their God was stronger. Well, God led Israel because Israel, he didn't protect them because they didn't serve him, see. And it wasn't because these false gods were stronger than the true God. The sin of Israel and Judah. In this case, the sin of Judah, the nation of Judah. The reign of Jehoiakim was recorded in 2 Kings 23:34 through 24:6, and 2 Chronicles 36, verses 4 through 8. The prophesying of Daniel continued through the 70 years of captivity. The captivity, according to Jeremiah's prophecy, was to last 70 years, which it did. And this is appealed to in the 9th chapter of Daniel, for example. And of course, Jeremiah mentioned it, and it's also mentioned in Chronicles. I believe maybe in Kings, 2 Kings, 2 Chronicles, both toward the end of the book, last chapter in the book. So it continued through that 70 years of captivity, according to Daniel 5, verses 30 through 31. And in that night, Belshazzar, the Chaldean king, was slain, and Darius, the Mede, received the kingdom, being about 62 years old. So Darius the Mede received the kingdom, and we have his age. So Belshazzar was the sub-king. He was the co-regent with his father Nabonidus, but that's another time for another study. Here's the Neo-Babylonian kings. There were, well, I say Neo, that means new. There had been an old Babylonian empire earlier. Nabopolassar from 626 to 605. He's not mentioned in the Bible, so NA means not applicable. It doesn't apply to him because he's not mentioned. Nebuchadnezzar, he is called Nebuchadnezzar. He's mentioned in 56 verses in the Bible. There is a variant spelling of his name, Nebuchadrezzar, and so there's a variant spelling of it. But from 604 to 652 BC, he reigned. And Emil Marduk, Evil Merodach, that's his name in Jeremiah 52, verses 31 to 34. He reigned from 562 to 560 BC for 2 years. Neriglissar, and he is not mentioned in the Bible, from 560 to 556. And then Babashi, Marduk, he's a boy king, and he was murdered in 556. He's not mentioned either. Nabonidus is not mentioned in the Bible. But Nabonidus reigned. He reigned from 556 to 539 BC. Now, there's a history of records Nabonidus. Belshazzar was a co-regent with his father, Nabonidus, and he reigned from 550 to 539 BC. He's called Belshazzar. He's mentioned in Daniel 5, 7, and 8. And that's a very interesting point, but we don't have time to go off into it. That's for a study of the book of Daniel, but I will give you a quick synopsis. Atheists used to say, well, the Bible was wrong because it mentions Belshazzar as king, and they couldn't find any evidence that he was ever mentioned as being king. Nabonidus was the last king of the Babylonian, Neo-Babylonian Empire. And so they say the Bible had an error in it. Well, of course, there's a logical fallacy in their reasoning. We don't have time to look at it, but if I teach the book of Daniel, we'll look at it when I teach the book of Daniel. It's from 550 to 539. His son was elevated to co-regent. And they finally found archaeological evidence that mentioned him in the records. They put their tablets on clay tablets and baked it clay. So we have actual evidence in the writings of the Babylonians that he was co-regent. Now that's implied in the book of Daniel, because when he promised Daniel that he would be third ruler in the kingdom, and so that implies he couldn't give him the second ruler spot because that was his spot. So he promised to make Daniel the third ruler of the kingdom. Of course, Daniel knew that he wasn't going to live very long. He died that very night. Belshazzar did when he promised it. But you need to study Daniel 5, 7, and 8 to get an overall picture of it. Okay. Post-captivity, post meaning after, that's Latin for after. Captivity prophets, after the captivity will be Haggai, Zechariah, and Malachi. Daniel was alive at the end of the captivity, and part of the book of Daniel relates to the end of the captivity. Daniel was carried into captivity while a boy and lived through the 70 years of captivity. Daniel was at least 80 years old and probably older when he was thrown in the lion's den. Now, keep that in mind. And another point we need to remember, Daniel was probably made into a eunuch. And this would explain why he did not want to go back to Palestine, to Canaan, to Jerusalem, because as a eunuch, he would not be able to go in and worship with the men under the law of Moses. Of course, that was done away with in the church. And we see that in Isaiah, the prophecy of Isaiah. But here, maybe other reasons, Daniel might have been too old and whatever. But Daniel stayed in the Medo-Persian Empire for some period of time before he apparently died. But he was probably 90 years old or maybe older when he died. He might have been even older. But he was one of the great men of the Bible. But he was a captivity prophet, but he lapped over just a little bit, we don't know how much, into the post-captivity time. The post-captivity history is recorded in 3 books. It would be Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. So we get the post-captivity history there for those 3 books. The Medo-Persian Empire began to rule at the end of the Babylonian Empire, and their kings or emperors would be Cyrus. He's called Cyrus the Great, and he reigned from 539 to 530. For 9 years he reigned. And Isaiah 34 prophesies of him. And of course, Daniel mentions him and discusses him. Ezra chapters 1 through 3 discusses him in some detail. And of course, there's historical evidence, records. Again, one of the ways they wrote was in cuneiform writing. They would write put it in clay, and then they'd bake that into a tablet. And this would be and their library was clay tablets. And they baked it in a kiln, and it was hard as a rock, and hard as a brick. So we have a lot of their libraries. They haven't even deciphered all of their libraries. They're still deciphering libraries and stuff. So they may find even more information about that will show that the Bible is accurate. They haven't found any evidence that the Bible was wrong, ever. Cambyses was the son of Cyrus, and he had a name. He's mentioned Ezra 4 through 6. He was reigned from 530 to 521. And that was Ahasuerus. And that's his name there. And then there's Pseudo-Spartus. And 521 BC, he reigned for about a year, just a portion of a year, actually. And he's called Artaxerxes. And he reigned from, as is mentioned, Ezra 4:7 through 23. Then there's one called Darius, and he's called Darius the Great, from 521 to 486. And he is mentioned in Ezra 5, chapters 5 and 6. Xerxes, his name is Ahasuerus. I want you to notice there are two men named Ahasuerus. It's like Israel right now has King Charles, but they've had a Charles before. And they've had some Georges, several named George. And so we have different names. And so that I think George the Fourth or Fifth, I can't remember, was one that was the king when the United States declared their independence from England or Great Britain. So again, having the same name is not strange. There's two Artaxerxes also. That could be confusing if you're not careful. And Ahasuerus was mentioned. Xerxes is his name, and the Bible name is Ahasuerus, and that's Esther chapters 1 through 10. He became the husband of Esther. Artaxerxes the first, and he is called Artaxerxes in the Bible in Nehemiah chapters 1 through 13, and Ezra chapters 7 through 10. He reigned from 468 to 423. So I bring this up because you have two men named Artaxerxes and two rulers named Ahasuerus. Don't confuse them because it can be confusing. Okay, you can get into a problem with them because there were two different kings with that name. Here is what apparently Cyrus the Great looked like, and this is from a cameo that they found that's of him. And he wasn't a bad-looking guy. This is what he looked like. This is a picture of him. He was born in 600 BC and died in 530. And again, he's mentioned in 2 Chronicles 36, 22, and verse 23 as well. In Ezra, and all these passages in Ezra, and Isaiah prophesied of him in about 720 BC, about 120 years before he's born. And so, again, Isaiah called him by name, and told what he would do. Of course, the disbelievers and the skeptics say, well, Isaiah could not have been written before that time, had to have been written after the fact, so that's why they try to date Isaiah later. That's why it's important that we put these books into the proper time frame. And my class in Logic and Debate for Christians, I give some arguments for this and show how we should reason to show this. So again, I'm not going to cover the same ground that's covered in the Logic course. You can get into that and read that. Even if you don't want to study the logic in the detail that I've covered it, some of the appendices will be very helpful in debating with atheists and reasoning with people who are skeptics and atheists. Let's read Isaiah 44:28, however. It saith of Cyrus, he is my shepherd. He shall perform all my pleasure, even saying of Jerusalem, she shall be built, and of the temple thy foundation shall be laid. So now Isaiah prophesied this in about 720 BC, and it wasn't fulfilled until much later, over 120 years after this, closer to 520 BC. Okay, I'm sorry, 540 BC when it was fulfilled, somewhere thereabouts. Here is Cambyses, and that's we got a cameo of him. That's what he looked like. I guess he had feathers and a hat on it. So that's him. Here's Darius. This is a relief carving of him. And of course, they always made their kings big, and he's got his foot on someone he's overcome and is ruling. This is some other king that he's put his foot on him, and I've subdued that king. See, he's got a bow in his hand, and so he's shown to be a powerful warrior and king. Okay. Here's Xerxes the First. I guess that's a relief carving of him. And again, we get an idea of what they look like, but this is his staff and his throne, and showing his kingly rule. Okay, we don't have any more of any of the other ones, but we do have some information about them in secular history. There's a lot of information about these kings. Haggai, and all of secular history, the bulk of it, vast majority of it, conforms with the Bible, and what doesn't is not when I say doesn't conform. It gives information that's not in the Bible, and so we don't find anything that actually contradicts the Bible. That it's actual historical information. There may be supplemental information, more information than the Bible gives us about them. So it doesn't contradict the Bible, of course. Haggai, this was a post-captivity prophet. He prophesied in 520 BC after the captivity. He was contemporary with Zechariah and Ezra and Nehemiah. Something very interesting about him. He says in the second year of Darius, the king, in the 6th month, in the first day of the month. So he dates it at the during the reign of Darius king, so we can get the exact date of when he prophesied. In the first day of the month came the word of Jehovah or Yahweh by Haggai the prophet unto Zerubbabel. Now Zerubbabel, if you study your genealogy of our Lord, the son of Shealtiel, and governor of Judah, he was a descendant of King David, so he was made governor. And he governed, and he's in the lineage of Christ. And Zerubbabel and Shealtiel both are governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. Now, there's a different Joshua in the Joshua, the book of Joshua, hundreds of years over close to almost 1,000 years is difference in time. Close to it, I would say about maybe 850, 900 years. Rounded numbers close to 1,000 years. So there are different people can kind of keep that in mind as well. And he's the governor of Judah to Joshua, son of Jehozadak, the high priest. So he's his father's Jehozadak, the high priest. It's that Joshua. Now this is recorded more about Haggai in Ezra 5, 1 and 2, and Ezra 6, 14 through 16. So he's mentioned in some other. He was contemporary of Zechariah and possibly Malachi. Malachi was a little bit later than Zechariah, but we don't know when Haggai died. That's part of the problem. There's some evidence that Haggai was an old man whenever he prophesied, because it appears from what he says that he had seen the temple before it was destroyed. So he had lived through the 70 years of captivity and remembered the temple. So that would make him, but the temple wasn't destroyed in the first carrying away. So might have been maybe 65 years instead of 70 years, it might have been 65 years or so. We had to go back a little bit. So he would be in his 70s at the very youngest, maybe close to 80 years old when he's prophesying here. And so I would take him to be over 80 years of age when he wrote the book of Haggai. That being the case, he might have lived through the captivity. I don't know. He was probably young when he saw the temple. He remembered it. He's old enough to remember the temple, but he didn't. We don't have any of his writings during the captivity period. Of course, he might have been a non-literary prophet during the captivity, during the time of the 70 years of Babylonian captivity. That's entirely possible. God definitely could have all kinds of non-literary prophets around during this time with the two literary prophets writing, Daniel and Ezekiel, Ezekiel and Daniel writing. Haggai also says, who is left among you in Haggai 2:3 that saw this house in its former glory? How do you see it now? Is it under your eyes? There's nothing. So he's saying that there's some of you that saw the house in the glory. So there were some people that were still alive. They had lived through the 7 years of captivity, probably just a little bit short of that, but from the time the temple was destroyed. And they remembered it. He's calling upon them to remember that. It appears that he is saying that he had seen it too. He had seen the glory. And the house that they built wasn't anything like the one that Solomon had built. Actually, David prefabricated it and Solomon assembled it when you study it. So Haggai lived during the lifetimes. Probably it appears that he saw that temple from this and this passage and some other things that are said. So if that's true, he lived during the lifetimes of Jeremiah, Haggai, Habakkuk, Zephaniah, when he was young. Lived during the lifetimes of the great prophets Daniel and Ezekiel. If possibly he knew both of these men. They haven't even known Jeremiah and Habakkuk. They have heard him preach. And Habakkuk and Zephaniah. Zechariah was probably among the group of priests who returned to Jerusalem in 536 BC. That's recorded in Nehemiah 12:4 and 12:16. Nehemiah 12:4, Edo, Jenathoah, Abijah. These were the chiefs of the priests and of the brethren of the days of Jeshua. Now, Jeshua is a variant spelling of Joshua. Okay. Of Edo, Zechariah, and so he's listing, he is the son of Edo, so he's the descendant of Edo. And his father, I think, was Edo. And so his name is the man. Zechariah was the grandson, however, of Edo. And we study this. He's the son of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, the son of Edo. It appears, the best we can tell, Berechiah, his father, didn't return. Probably he died. I'm not going to say he was unfaithful to God. He probably died from something that happened, illness or something, and did not return. So what we find is he's still called the son of Berechiah, but Berechiah was not listed as those who returned. Now, the fact he wasn't listed doesn't mean he didn't return, but it's pretty strong evidence that he didn't return to Jerusalem. Right? It's possible Edo was a prophet. The New King James Version actually uses that, but other translations don't translate it that way. And so the New King James Version says Edo the prophet. Right? So we see the comma in there. And so is it saying that Zechariah is the prophet or Edo is the prophet? Right? I read that as possibly saying that Edo is a prophet. Well, it wouldn't surprise me at all. God had many prophets, and Edo would be a non-literary prophet. Zechariah's prophecies were spoken between 520 and 518 BC. And so we see there's a 2-year stretch period of time. Some commentators, however, think that the latter parts of the book were written during the time of Esther, later. And they might have been, apparently, Zechariah was not old like Haggai was. Zechariah was a young prophet, and Haggai was an old prophet. He's toward the end of his life. And so they're the young and the old work together, and they should work together. Respect the older people, but the older people should not look down upon the young if they're faithful to God. Should honor them and respect them. No doubt he was murdered. Zechariah was, like many of the prophets, were murdered. Jesus mentions him. He says that upon you, that is the Jews, should become all the righteous bloodshed on the earth, from the blood of Abel the righteous, and the blood of Zachariah the son of Berechiah, whom you slew between the sanctuary and the altar. As a side point, let me point out, if you study Abel more carefully, Abel was a prophet. So because it's the blood of all the righteous, but other passages speak of this and say Abel is the blood of all the prophets, and that it's from Abel. So we find that Abel himself was a prophet, but we're not looking at Abel here right now. Blood of Zachariah, son of Berechiah, whom he slew between the sanctuary and the altar. Now, some misinterpret this, and they say, well, this is an error in the Bible because the Zachariah that was slain between the sanctuary and the altar was a priest, and it wasn't the son of Berechiah. So Jesus made a mistake, not necessarily. That doesn't follow, because there were many men named Zachariah. I think there were two prophets. There were two priests named Zachariah who were killed between the sanctuary and the altar. I think there's evidence of it. We have an earlier one way back earlier, several hundred years before the time of Zachariah, son of Berechiah. And we don't have any explicit evidence how Zachariah, son of Berechiah, died, except what Jesus said. So again, the atheists had jumped on this and used some pretty bad reasoning to draw the conclusion that there's a contradiction. And of course, when I finish the logic course that I'm teaching right now, we'll go into alleged contradictions and discrepancies, at least in the Bible. Let's look further. For the historical record of the contemporary events, read the books of Ezra, Nehemiah, and Esther. That'll get you the record of what's going on in the kingdom at that time. Ezra 5:1 says, now the prophets, Haggai the prophet, and Zechariah son of Iddo prophesied. Now why does he call him the son of Iddo? Well, I think his father was dead. That's why I think he did. And it's possible his father died young, and Zechariah was raised by his grandfather. Again, I'm just kind of assuming something here because his father Berechiah is not mentioned here. So he's the son of Iddo, prophesied unto the Jews that were at Judah and Jerusalem in the name of God of Israel, prophesied they unto them. So we have the two prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, both prophesying at the same time. So they're contemporary prophets, post-captivity prophets. Malachi was the last of the prophets. Of course, Malachi means my messenger. Malach is the Hebrew word for angel, which means the messenger. The book was written about 445 BC. Assuming that my date's correct, we should read Ezra 7 through 10, chapter 7 through 10, and the whole book of Nehemiah to get the historical background in Israel at the time Malachi was prophesying. Gets you a better picture of it. Malachi was the last literary prophet in the Old Testament. We don't have time to go into it, but I think we can show that prophesying ceased and didn't come up again until the days of the New Testament days of John the Baptist. And we find that prophets began again. They had not had any prophets for about 400 years. Now prophets come on the scene, and the people then become very excited about it. Of course, the Messiah is coming, and that's, of course, Jesus Christ, the Messiah. Malachi prophesied of the coming of John the Baptist, John the Immerser, Malachi 3:1 and Malachi 4, verses 5 through 6. Behold, I send my messenger, my angel, my messenger. Now, again, the term messenger and the angel are the same word. But he wasn't an angel in the sense of being an angelic being out of heaven. He was a messenger of God, just like Gabriel and others were messengers of God. God sent him the message with a message. Behold, I send my messenger, and he shall prepare the way before me. And the Lord whom you seek will suddenly come to his temple, and the messenger of the covenant whom you desire, behold, he cometh, saith Jehovah of hosts. So now this is the one who prepared the way before me. God said he'll prepare the way before me. The one he prepared the way for is Jesus, and he's called Jehovah. Jesus is called God here in this prophecy by implication. He is deity. That's what the word Son of God means. Behold, I will send you Elijah, in Malachi 4, 5, and 6, the prophet before the great and terrible day of Jehovah comes. Now, it's not literally Elijah, it's one who came in the likeness of Elijah. Jesus clarifies this, and he studied the New Testament more fully. It's a figure of speech. He's going to be Elijah in the sense that he's like Elijah. He dressed like Elijah, lived like Elijah, and he was a great prophet like Elijah. Elijah was one of the greatest of all the prophets. But Jesus said of John the Baptist that he was none greater had risen than John. And he, that is the one who's called Elijah, that's John the Baptist, he shall turn the hearts of the fathers to the children and the heart of the children to their fathers, lest I come and smite the earth with a curse. So it's a warning. This was fulfilled in Matthew 11:14, Mark 9:11 through 14, and Luke 1:17. So we won't look at those passages here. But let me give you a quick rundown of this. I don't know if you can see this, but this is a little chart that shows the kings all the way from Josiah all the way down to Alexander the Great. All right. So we come down to Alexander the Great defeats Persia in 330 BC. And so we run through the Babylonians, the Medo-Persians, and then the Greek Empire, Macedonian Empire. And we see how on the top of the chart up here, see how these prophets fit into this time frame. That may help you some. I don't know whether it will or not. But I want to give you some quick important facts about the Bible before we end tonight. The oldest book is probably the book of Job, probably written about 2000 BC. I dated that early because of the longevity of Job, how long he lived. The last books written in the whole Bible were probably John's writings. I don't date them in the 90s. I date them before AD 70. Middle to late first century, I would date them before AD 70. There were about 40 different men who were known to have written parts of the Bible, approximately 40. We don't know exactly how many, over a period of some 2,000 years. Might have been 2,100 years, 22 or 2,300 years, but it's around, in round numbers, it's 2,000 years. All the writers that we know of were Jews or descendants of Abraham, except Luke and whoever wrote the book of Job. And I think the man is mentioned in the book of Job who wrote it. I think he was a prophet there. And most of the writers of the Old Testament didn't personally know the other writers. There were some that knew one another, but there's time differences between them, hundreds of years in time. So they wouldn't have personally known one another. They had different backgrounds. Some were farmers, some were shepherds, some were kings, some were priests, some were tax collectors, others were fishermen and other occupations. But we have a wide range of backgrounds, yet the writers of the Bible have a unity of purpose and doctrine. All of their writings fit together with no contradictions, and they have a thrust and a flow, and that's in that study of the gist of the Bible. You can see how it flows through. This unity is one of kind of implicit, one of many kinds of evidence that God was the ultimate writer of the Bible. And it wasn't just a whole bunch of men that put stuff together over a period of 2,000 years. and they all happened to be in agreement. They had the central theme was the same. There are two main divisions of the Bible: the Old Testament, containing 39 books, and of course the Jews put them in 22 books, but it's the same material we have. The New Testament, containing 27 books, we'll be looking at them a little bit later. Both the Old and New Testaments contain different kinds of literature, and we call this the genre of literature. The literature has a different thrust. The Old Testament written over a period of about 1,500 years in that rounded numbers, might be 16 or 1700. This concludes our study, our second lesson on the introduction to the Bible.